Echoes of the Unknown.
Welcome back to Echoes of the Unknown. I am the Archivist. Tonight's file is a cautionary one, a stark reminder that the safety we find in the light can be a dangerous illusion. It details a walk home that became a descent into a predatory darkness hiding in plain sight. Chapter 1. The Lamplighter's Tune. My name is Ethan, and I've always found a strange comfort in empty city streets at night. As a graphic designer who often worked late, my walk home was a ritual of decompression. The frantic energy of the day would recede, replaced by the hushed solitude of a sleeping metropolis. The world felt like it was mine alone, painted in the monotonous, comforting orange glow of the sodium vapor lamps. They were old lights for an old part of the city, casting long shadows and turning familiar streets into something beautifully lonely. I had walked this exact route hundreds of times. I knew every crack in the pavement, every sealed-off doorway. I had never once felt afraid. Tonight, however, was different. I left the office just after 2 a.m. The air was cool and heavy with the promise of rain. The first few blocks were normal, a symphony of silence punctuated by the soft scuff of my own footsteps on the concrete. It was on Hemlock Street that the first discordant note was played. As I approached the cone of light cast by the next lamppost, I heard something. It was faint, delicate, and utterly out of place, the tinkling melody of a child's music box. It was a simple looping tune, one you'd expect from a ballerina figurine in a jewelry box. The sound was unnervingly clear, seeming to emanate not from a nearby apartment window but from the very air beneath the lamp. I stopped just at the edge of the light, scanning the area. The street was deserted, no open windows, no parked cars with a forgotten toy inside. There was nothing. As I stood there in the darkness, the music continued its gentle looping lullaby. I took a hesitant step into the pool of orange light. The sound didn't get louder, it just felt closer, all around me. I looked up at the lamp itself, half expecting to see a small speaker strapped to it. There was only the old rusted metal housing and the buzzing glass bulb, chalking it up to a strange urban echo or my own tired mind playing tricks. I walked on, the music fading as I entered the stretch of darkness leading to the next lamp. The silence between the lights felt deeper now, more pronounced. I reached the edge of the next illuminated circle. As I prepared to step into it, a new sound began. This time, it was a woman, humming, a soft, mournful tune, just like the music box. The sound was clear, close, and seemed to have no discernible source. It was simply there, in the light. This time, a genuine shiver traced its way down my spine. Two different impossible sounds, in two consecutive pools of light. This wasn't a coincidence. My designer's mind, trained to see patterns, was screaming at me. I decided to test a theory. I stood perfectly still on the threshold, 1 foot in the shadows, 1 foot on the edge of the light. The humming continued. I took a half step back, plunging myself completely into the darkness between the lamps. The humming stopped. Instantly, the silence rushed back in, absolute and heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. I took a deliberate step forward, back into the light. The humming started again, mid-tune, as if it had never stopped. No, I whispered, the word a puff of mist in the cold air. No way. I stumbled backward into the shadows again. The sound vanished. It was a switch. The darkness was silent. The light was haunted. A primal fear. A fear I hadn't felt since I was a child, afraid of the monster under the bed, began to bloom in my chest. The comforting orange glow of the street lamps no longer felt safe. It felt like the lure of an anglerfish, a promise of safety that concealed a predator. The shadows, once voids to be hurried through, now felt like the only sanctuary. I felt watched, but not from the dark alleys or darkened windows. I felt watched from the light itself. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I fumbled to turn on the flashlight. The powerful eddy beam cut a sterile white path ahead, but it felt weak, insignificant against the oppressive orange glow. I looked down the street. My route home was a corridor of these glowing traps, each one separated by a precious few meters of shadow. Orion's journal, from the subway legend, flashed in my mind. A story I'd read online. A trap. I had to get off this street. The next intersection, leading to a busier, more brightly lit avenue, was 3 lampposts away. 3 more pools of light to cross. My mind raced. Do I risk it? Do I turn back and take the long way around, staying in the dark? The humming from the lamp in front of me seemed to grow a little more insistent, a little sweeter. It was a siren's call. Come on in. It's safe here. It's warm. That decided it. I wasn't going into that light. I took a deep breath, crouched low, and prepared to sprint through the next stretch of darkness, hugging the shadowed walls of the buildings, to get to the next island of safety. As I broke into a run, the humming abruptly stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder at the pool of light I was leaving behind. I expected to see nothing, just an empty circle of orange on the asphalt. I was wrong. In the center of the light, where moments before there had been only empty space, a figure was taking shape. It wasn't solid. It was coalescing out of the light itself, a shimmering, wavering form, made of pure incandescent orange. It was tall, impossibly thin, and had the vague shape of a man, like a heat haze distorted into a human silhouette. It stood perfectly still, its head tilted slightly as if observing me. The Lamplighter, a name that screamed into my mind from nowhere. It didn't move. It didn't have to. It had failed to lure me in. It was simply watching me go. Terror gave my legs a strength I didn't know they had. I sprinted through the darkness, my lungs burning. I reached the next patch of shadow and pressed myself against a brick wall, gasping for air. I looked back. The first figure was gone. The light it had occupied was now empty. I looked forward. My path was a gauntlet, a long straight street, lined with dozens of these silent waiting lights, each one a stage, each one a trap. I was safe here, in this sliver of darkness, but the only way home was through them.
Chapter 2. A Symphony of Silence. Panic is a poor strategist. My first instinct was to keep running, to blindly sprint through the gauntlet of light and shadow until I reached the safety of the main avenue. But the sight of that shimmering, silent figure had shocked the adrenaline into a cold, sharp clarity. It hadn't chased me. It hadn't needed to. It knew the street was a trap, and I was the rat in its maze. Running blindly would only exhaust me and lead me into another one of its lures. I forced my breathing to slow, pressing myself deeper into the narrow strip of darkness between two buildings. I was in a blind spot, an intermission. I needed a plan. I looked down the street. 3 more lamps to the intersection. 3 more stages, each potentially with its own unique, horrifying performance. What were the rules of this hunt? The first lamp had a music box. The second, a humming woman. What would the third hold? A crying child, a familiar voice, my own. The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. The Lamplighter wasn't just a monster. It was a performer, a curator of sounds designed to break a person's will. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. The flashlight beam seemed pathetic, but it was my light. It was clean, white, and silent, a stark contrast to the predatory orange glow of the lamps. An idea, desperate and probably foolish, began to form in my mind. What if I didn't have to play by its rules? What if I could create my own darkness? The city's infrastructure is old. Power grids are often divided, block by block. Far down the street, near the final lamp before the intersection, I could just make out the dark, rectangular shape of a utility box mounted on the side of a brick building. It was a long shot, A gamble based on a dozen assumptions, but it was better than running into the next trap. If I could get to that box, if I could somehow cut the power to this section of the street, I could plunge the entire block into true safe darkness. The plan was simple. The execution was terrifying. I had to cross 2 more pools of light to get to the final stretch of shadow that housed the utility box. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I focused on the next lamp, about 20 meters away. "Okay, Ethan," I whispered to my camera, which was still recording. "New plan. We're fighting back. We're turning off the lights." I crouched low and burst from my hiding spot, sprinting across the open space. I kept my eyes down, focused on the ground, refusing to look up at the lamp, refusing to acknowledge whatever performance it had prepared for me. But you don't need to see a sound to hear it. As I entered the circle of light, the new sound hit me. It was laughter, a group of people laughing at a shared joke. It was warm, convivial, the kind of sound you'd hear from a happy table at a restaurant. It was so jarringly normal that it was profoundly terrifying. It was a sound of life in a place that now felt like death. I felt an irrational pang of longing, a desire to join that happy, unseen group. The lure was powerful. It was a promise of community in the face of absolute isolation. I ignored it, my legs pumping, my lungs burning. I ran through the light and into the next patch of shadow, collapsing against the cold brick of another building. The laughter cut off as if a switch had been flipped. I was safe. For now, 2 down, 1 to go. I didn't give myself time to rest. I pushed off the wall and sprinted again, towards the final lamp before my goal. This time the sound was the worst yet. It was my own voice. "Hello, is anyone there?" It was a perfect recording of what I had called out in the subway station, in that other urban legend I'd investigated months ago. A clip from one of my own videos. The Lamplighter had access to my history, my digital ghost. It was using my own voice, my own skepticism against me. It was mocking me. The sound of my own voice, filled with a false confidence from a time before I knew the dark was real, nearly made me stumble. It was a psychological blow, a deeply personal attack. It was telling me, "I know who you are. I know what you pretend to be." I choked back a cry and pushed harder, my feet pounding on the pavement. I burst through the sound of my own voice and into the final stretch of shadow. I had made it. The utility box was just ahead, a dark metal rectangle against the brick. I scrambled towards it, my hands searching its surface for a latch or a handle. It was a standard city utility panel, sealed with a simple tumbler lock that could be opened with a basic key. A key I did not have. Despair washed over me. I was so close. I pulled at the handle, rattling it uselessly. It was solid. I looked back down the street. The pools of light I had run through were empty, silent, waiting. I was trapped in this final shadow, my plan a failure. Then my eyes fell on something I'd picked up earlier that day, a heavy metal portable charger for my phone. It was a dense solid brick of lithium-ion. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked. I gripped the charger, hefted it, and slammed it against the small cheap lock on the utility box. The sound of metal hitting metal was shockingly loud in the silent street. I hit it again, and again. On the 4th strike, with a sharp crack, the lock mechanism broke. The panel door swung open with a rusty groan. Inside was a dizzying array of thick black cables, and a large industrial-looking main switch, currently in the U position. A faded stenciled label above it read UPIM, lock sate EPIM, NEPIM, NEPIM. Lighting grid 7. This was it. My heart pounding with a mix of terror and triumphant hope. I reached in and wrapped my hand around the heavy, insulated lever. I took one last look down the street at the silent, waiting orange lights. Show's over, I grunted, and pulled the switch down with all my strength. The result was instantaneous and absolute. The world plunged into a darkness so complete, it felt like a physical blow. The oppressive orange glow vanished, replaced by a true deep black, broken only by the distant faint lights of the city's skyline. The street was no longer a series of stages, it was just a street. The silence was no longer a tense absence of sound, it was just quiet. I had won. I stood there for a moment, panting in the beautiful, perfect darkness. A giddy sense of relief washed over me. I had faced the monster and beaten it. Then from the end of the street, a new sound began. It wasn't a lure, it wasn't a recording. It was a slow, rhythmic, and very real sound. Tink, tink, tink. The sound of a small metal object, like a coin or a key, being methodically tapped against a metal pole. It was coming from the direction of the first lamppost, and it was getting closer. I realized my mistake. I hadn't beaten the monster. I had just changed the rules. It was no longer trying to lure me into its light. Now, it was coming to find me in the dark.
Chapter 3: The Rules of Darkness. My victory was a flash of lightning in a storm, illuminating the true horror for a brief, triumphant moment before plunging me into a deeper darkness. The silence I had created was not a shield. It was a perfectly prepared hunting ground for a creature that no longer needed to hide in the light. Tink. The sound was sharp, precise. Tink. It was closer. Keen. It was the sound of a long, thin piece of metal tapping against the hollow metal pole of the now dead street lamp. I was hiding near. The lamplighter, or whatever it was, in this new form, wasn't blind in the dark. It was using the street lamps, as a blind man uses a cane, feeling its way through the world it once owned. Tink. It was at the next lamp post. Its pace was unnervingly patient. It wasn't rushing. It knew the street was a dead end. It knew I was here. This wasn't a chase. It was a slow, methodical sweep. My breath hitched in my throat, a loud, ragged sound in the suffocating quiet. I had to move, but not just run. I had to be silent. I was no longer the prey in a chase. I was the mouse hiding from the owl, where the slightest rustle of leaves meant death. I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, the screen off. My heavy boots felt like lead weights. I rose slowly, carefully, shifting my weight to the balls of my feet. The nearest cover was a narrow, garbage-strewn alleyway between two old brick buildings about 10 meters away. It was a sliver of deeper black against the faintly moonlit gray of the street. The tapping stopped. I froze, my body rigid. Had it heard me? I listened, my ears straining, trying to pass the silence. I heard nothing but the frantic drumming of blood in my own ears. After a paralyzing 10 seconds, the tapping resumed, further down the street this time. It hadn't heard me. It was just pausing, listening, a predator savoring the hunt. Now, I moved. I didn't run. I glided, a desperate, clumsy shadow, from my spot to the mouth of the alley. Every step was a calculated risk, my boots making soft, brushing sounds on the asphalt. I reached the alley and pressed myself into its narrow opening, sinking back behind a large, overflowing dumpster. The stench of wet garbage filled my nostrils, but it was the most beautiful smell in the world. It was the smell of cover. From my hiding spot, I peeked around the edge of the dumpster, and I saw it for the first time in the true dark. It was no longer a shimmering being of orange light. The absence of light had given it a terrifying physical form. It was a silhouette, yes,
but a silhouette of utter void. It was a patch of darkness, so complete, it seemed to suck the faint moonlight out of the air around it. A walking, man-shaped black hole. It was unnaturally tall and thin, its limbs moving with a disjointed grace. In one of its long, spindly hands, it held a slender pole of dark metal, which it used to tap against each street lamp as it passed. It moved past my alley, and as it did, it stopped again. The tapping ceased. It stood directly parallel to my hiding spot. I shrank back, trying to make myself smaller, trying to stop breathing. It slowly turned its featureless, void-like head towards the alley entrance. It didn't move for a full minute. It was listening, sensing. A cold realization washed over me. It wasn't just about sound. My phone, even with the screen off, had a battery. It had a faint electronic signature. My body gave off heat. I was a beacon of life and energy in its dead, silent world. The darkness wasn't enough. To be safe, I had to be as dead as the street itself. My hand dove into my pocket, my fingers frantically finding the power button on my phone. I held it down, praying the screen wouldn't light up. After a few seconds, a faint vibration against my leg told me it was off. Truly off. The creature on the street remained still for a few more seconds. Then, as if losing interest, it turned its head forward and resumed its slow, patient patrol. Tink, tink, tink. The sound receded down the block. I had survived again. I had learned a new rule. No light, no sound, no energy. I couldn't stay here. The main busy avenue, with its river of headlights and noise and life, was only a block away. I just had to get there. The main street was the creature's patrol route, so that was a no-go. But these old city blocks were a web of back alleys. I could navigate them, a rat in the walls, and pop out on the main avenue, leaving this nightmare behind. With the creatures tapping faint in the distance, I moved deeper into the alley. It was a maze of overflowing dumpsters, discarded furniture, and fire escapes. I moved slowly, my hands outstretched, feeling my way through the darkness. The sounds of the city grew louder, clearer, the distant rumble of traffic, the faint wail of a far-off siren. It was the sound of salvation. I reached the end of the alley, which opened into another, wider service lane. I crossed it, and entered another narrow passage. I was almost there. I could see the bright, reassuring glow of the main avenue at the end of this final stretch. The light pollution from the city created a visible haze just ahead. My heart soared. I was going to make it. I was going to live. I picked up my pace, a giddy, triumphant laugh bubbling in my chest. I stumbled out of the mouth of the alley, emerging from the darkness, expecting to be greeted by the roar of traffic and the bright lights of civilization. But I wasn't. I was standing on a familiar, silent street. The pavement was cracked in a pattern I knew by heart. Across the street was a sealed-off doorway I recognized, and in front of me, about 20 meters away, was a single dead street lamp. I looked up. The sign on the corner building read Hemlock Saint. It was the same street. I was back at the very beginning, right where I had first heard the music box. The geography was a lie. The alleys hadn't been a path forward. They were a loop, a cruel joke designed to lead me right back to the start of the maze. And from the far, far end of the street, a sound began, cutting through the silence of my despair. Tink, a pause, tink. It was starting again. A new patrol, a new hunt, and this time, it knew I was here.
Chapter 4. Run. The pattern in the echo. The world didn't just shrink to the size of a city block. It collapsed into a repeating 4-minute loop of terror. The sight of Hemlock Street, exactly as I had first found it, broke something inside me. It wasn't just a physical trap. It was a psychological prison, a Mobius strip of asphalt and dread. The alleys weren't an escape. They were the winding of the key, resetting the nightmare music box. For a long moment, I simply stood there, exposed at the mouth of the alley, paralyzed by a despair so profound it felt like a physical weight. The distant, methodical tink, tink, tink of the conductor starting its patrol again was no longer just a threat. It was the ticking of a clock that always reset to midnight. The first hint of true madness brushed against my mind, a fleeting, seductive thought. Just give up, walk into the street, let it find you. It will be over. It was the camera, still clutched in my hand, that saved me. Its inert weight was a reminder that I was a witness. My apathetic despair receded, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. This thing, this system, had rules. It had patterns. I was a designer. I didn't just see patterns. I deconstructed them, and I would deconstruct this one. The creature was still at the far end of the street. I had time. I scanned my surroundings, my mind now working not as a victim, but as an analyst. I slipped into a recessed doorway across the street, a dark alcove that offered a perfect vantage point of the entire block. I controlled my breathing, silenced my phone, and became part of the shadow. I would not run this time. I would watch. I would learn. The void-like silhouette began its slow procession. Tink, tink, tink. Its long metal pole struck the first dead lamp. A pause. It moved on. Tink. The second lamp. Another pause. It was a metronome marking the slow death of hope. I followed its progress, my eyes scanning for any deviation, any inconsistency. The creature was methodical, its actions precise. It tapped the third lamp, the fourth, the fifth. Each tap was identical, each pause the same length. It was a flawless, repeating algorithm of terror. Then, it happened. The creature was approaching the sixth lamppost in the line. It glided past it, its long legs moving silently. But there was no tink. It didn't tap the pole. It just passed it, leaving it untouched, and moved on to the seventh, which it tapped with its usual rhythmic precision. My heart leaped. It was a tiny detail, an almost imperceptible break in the pattern, but in this world of crushing, perfect repetition, it was a supernova. It skipped one. It skipped lamp number 6. Why? My mind raced, discarding possibilities. It wasn't random. The creature's every movement was too deliberate for that. It wasn't a mistake, so there had to be a reason. I watched as the conductor continued its patrol to the end of the street, tapping every other pole without fail. I was left with two hypotheses, both born of desperate hope. The sixth lamp was a flaw in the system, a glitch in the echo's code. It wasn't part of the illusion, which meant the creature couldn't interact with it. It was an anchor to the real world. Or, the sixth lamp was the center of the system. It wasn't just a lamp, it was the server, the queen on the chessboard, the heart of the loop. It wasn't a glitch, it was the core. Either way, its significance was absolute. My goal was no longer to escape the street. My goal was to reach that pole. The creature reached the end of the block, paused for a full minute, and then turned around to begin its patrol in the opposite direction. It was coming back. My window of opportunity was now. I couldn't wait for it to pass me again. I had to move while the hunter was on the field. I looked from my hiding spot to the sixth lamppost. It was about 40 meters away, on the opposite side of the street. Getting to it would mean crossing open ground. I would have to be fast, and I would have to be silent. I waited until the creature was about halfway down the block. Its back to me. Its slow, steady tapping was the only rhythm in the world. I took a deep, silent breath. Now, I burst from the doorway, sprinting across the street in a low crouch. My soft-soled shoes made almost no sound, but my ragged breathing felt like a hurricane. I ran not for the shadows this time, but for the base of the anomalous pole. I was 10 meters away when the tapping stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The creature had stopped. Its featureless head was slowly turning in my direction. It had heard me. The patient patrol was over. The silence was broken by a new sound. A rapid, angry series of taps. Tink, 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 tink. It was the sound of its pole striking the ground rapidly as it changed direction, a predator that had located its prey. I didn't have time. I threw myself the last few meters, my hand slapping against the cold metal base of the sixth lamppost. I fell to my knees beside it, my fingers frantically searching its surface. A panel, a switch, a loose plate, a symbol, anything. I needed something to prove Thorne's theories right, something to prove this wasn't just another dead end. There was nothing. It was just a pole, smooth, cold, rusted metal, identical to all the others. A wave of nausea and utter despair hit me. I had gambled everything on a single, meaningless detail. I had been wrong. I looked up from my hopeless search. The creature was no longer tapping. It was running, a silent, terrifying sprint. The void-like silhouette was rushing down the street towards me, closing the distance with an impossible fluid speed. It was a torrent of pure darkness, and I was directly in its path. I scrambled backward, pressing my back hard against the cold metal of the pole. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This was it, the end of the loop. I raised my camera one last time, an involuntary act of a witness documenting his own demise, as the shape of a man made of nothingness bore down upon me.
Chapter 5. Wrong. Breaking the echo. There is a unique crystalline moment that arrives with the certainty of death. The panic evaporates, time slows, and the world comes into razor-sharp focus. As the creature of void and silence rushed towards me, this terrifying clarity descended. I was going to die. My back was pressed against a cold metal pole that had been a false prophet, and my end was a silent, fluid darkness. My camera was still raised, a useless prosthesis. In that final second, my gaze drifted upward, following the length of the pole to the lamp at its summit, as if looking to a heaven that had long since abandoned this street. The glass housing was dark, shattered in my memory by the portable charger I no longer held. But this wasn't memory. This was now, and the glass wasn't shattered, and inside it there was no bulb. Instead, nestled where the filament should have been, was a small, ornate object. It was metallic, reflecting the faint moonlight with a dull sheen. My mind, supercharged with adrenaline, recognized it instantly. It was the child's music box, the first lure, the origin of the first lie. The sixth lamp wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an exit. It was the heart. It was the projector. The reason the conductor never tapped this pole was because it was already claimed. This lamp powered the entire illusion, and its fuel was the captured looping echo of a lost child's toy. The creature was almost upon me, its featureless face a vortex of absolute nothingness. I could feel a coldness emanating from it, a tangible aura of anti-life. I didn't have time to think, I only had time to act. My hand instinctively went to my belt, where I had clipped my heavy metal portable charger, the tool I had used to break into the utility box. It was the only solid, weighty object I had, my only rock in a world of ghosts. I ripped it from my belt. The creature was 5 meters away. I had one chance. It wasn't a thought. It was a pure primal scream of defiance. With a roar that tore from my throat, I swung the heavy charger with all the force I could muster, not at the creature, but upward at the glass housing of the lamp above me. The charger flew true, a dark meteor against the night sky. It struck the glass with a sound that was explosively, beautifully real, a loud, sharp crack that shattered the oppressive silence. The glass housing didn't just break. It detonated. Shards rained down around me, and from the wreckage, the small music box tumbled out, falling through the air in slow motion. It hit the asphalt with a final, discordant crunch, its delicate mechanism crushed on impact. The moment the music box broke, the world screamed. It wasn't a sound my ears could hear, but one my soul felt. The creature, just a meter from me, threw its head back in a silent, agonizing shriek. Its form, once a stable void, began to violently glitch and distort. It flickered like a dying television, its silhouette tearing apart into ragged bands of static and blackness. The coherent shape of a man dissolved into a chaotic, writhing column of pure corruption. Then, just as suddenly, it imploded. It folded in on itself and vanished, leaving behind nothing but the memory of its terrifying presence. The illusion shattered with it. The oppressive, absolute darkness lifted. The silent, looping street of Hemlock Saint dissolved around me like smoke. The sounds of the real world rushed in, a tidal wave of sensory information. A car horn blared nearby. The distant rumble of traffic returned. I could smell exhaust fumes and damp city air. I was no longer on Hemlock Street. I was kneeling in the middle of a narrow, unfamiliar back alley. The real city towering around me. The brick walls were covered in graffiti, the ground littered with trash. I looked back at where the lamppost had been. There was nothing there but a solid brick wall. The loop had spat me out. I was free. I scrambled to my feet, my body trembling with the aftershocks of terror and relief. On the ground where the music box had shattered, there was only my dented portable charger. The echo and its source were gone. I stumbled out of the alley and onto a busy, brightly lit avenue. The stream of headlights, the crowds of people, the noise. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I eventually made it home, a ghost in my own skin. The footage I knew was my proof, my validation. The next day, after hours of staring at a wall, I finally forced myself to open my laptop. I plugged in the SD card and began to review the recordings. It was all there, the empty street,
The shifting sounds, the utility box, the terrifying void-like shape of the conductor, the final desperate throw. It was undeniable. Then, out of curiosity, I went back to the earlier clips. I wanted to hear the lures again. I played the part where I had stood before the second lamppost, the one where the woman had been humming. I watched myself on the screen, standing there, a look of dawning horror on my face. But the audio track was flat. There was no humming. There was only silence. My blood ran cold. I skipped to the next clip, where my own recorded voice had mocked me. I watched my on-screen self flinch at the sound, but again there was nothing, just my own heavy breathing and the sound of my footsteps. The Lamplighter hadn't been projecting sounds, it had been using them, using real echoes of real moments, and to use them, it had to consume them. The humming woman, the laughing group, my own voice from a past investigation, their sounds were now gone from the record, stolen from the world, to fuel a nightmare for a single night. They were now truly, and forever, just echoes of the unknown.
The recordings end there. Ethan escaped the loop, but the silence in his archives is a chilling testament to the price. It seems the creature doesn't just haunt, it erases. It leaves me with one final, unsettling question. If a memory is stripped of its sound, does it still exist, or does it become just another echo? Share your theories below. Until next time, be wary of the light